When it comes to action on climate change, research released today suggests that Australia is lagging well behind both China and the US. London-based Vivid Economics modelled implied carbon prices in the power generation sector for Australia and its 5 top trading partners. The report puts Australia in 5th place and argues that heavy polluters in Australia should therefore receive less compensation if a carbon tax or a trading scheme was introduced. The report's author, Dr. Cameron Hepburn, joined me from London a short time ago. Cameron Hepburn, welcome to Lateline Business.
Thanks very much.
Now, you've set the cat among the pigeons, I think, here. Australia doesn't come out of your report very well.
No, I'm afraid it doesn't. We looked at 6 countries, and Australia was 5th of the 6th in terms of its implicit carbon price in the electricity generating sector. It had a price of $2 roughly a tonne of CO2, and that compares with, say, almost $30 a tonne of CO2 in the UK, and higher numbers in Japan, US and China. Actually, China came out further ahead than some people, including us, might have expected, at close to $8 a tonne on a market exchange rate basis.
Can I drill down on that a little bit? What do you mean by implicit carbon price? Because we're not talking about, obviously, actual carbon prices, but how did you base this effective carbon price?
Yeah, it's not an actual carbon price in the sense of a direct price that's been put in place by a tax or a trading scheme. But what we've done is to trawl through hundreds of different policies across these countries, and actually we looked at some others first, and then worked out the implicit carbon price, so the as-if price, carbon price that would be put in place to have the same effect as that particular policy. So the way we've done that is, so to take, for instance, a renewable energy target or portfolio standard, we've compared the price per megawatt hour and then looked at the difference between the electricity generation that is being supported and the emissions intensity of the electricity generation that is coal-fired or oil-fired, and then calculated an implicit carbon price to flow through from that.
And what this has resulted in is that because Australia has got such a low implicit carbon price, you argue that probably less compensation should be required for polluters in Australia.
Well, certainly, yeah, if anything, the report suggests that compensation is required in other countries and certainly less so in Australia. We're going on to do some further work to look at the implications of this directly for some emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries, but yeah, certainly that's one of the implications.
I mean, it's tricky. Obviously, a lot of our power stations are either foreign-owned or state-owned, but I guess the response from that area was, is this really a level playing field? And isn't there not a fundamental difference in terms of whether some of the other countries are getting subsidies from governments in this area, or do you feel you've taken that all into account?
What we've looked at is the relative price, so the difference between the price on clean generation and the price on dirty generation. You can achieve that difference in several ways. So subsidies are a part of that. So we've looked at feed-in tariffs for solar, wind and other renewables. That's factored into account. That we've also factored into account, in a negative sense, fossil fuel subsidies, which China has, which lowers their implicit price, and even after factoring that into account, they still come out with a higher implicit carbon price than Australia does.
I've spoken to people beyond the power generation sector today, cement, coal, aluminium, steel, those sorts of areas. Now, a couple of trade-exposed companies in the top 50, their views are the same. They accept we're not leaders here, but they're concerned that until there is a global carbon price, that if trade-exposed industries aren't compensated, then the problem will simply be exported and you'll just get carbon leakage.
Look, I think carbon leakage is, in theory, a real concern. I've done some academic work on carbon leakage as an idea. In practice, though, I think the story is really quite different. And there are probably only 2 sectors, according to the Grattan Institute's work on this area, which I think is quite good, in Australia, that would actually justify levels of compensation. The reality is that carbon prices in other countries around the world are higher, as we've shown, and increasing, if anything. And a result of that is that other countries are undertaking this transition to a low-carbon economy earlier, and they're getting more investment in clean energy. So, it's no surprise perhaps that China is leading the world also in clean energy investment at $35 billion US, compared with 11 billion for the UK, 16 billion for the US, and less than 1 billion for Australia.
So, Cameron Hepburn, what is your advice to high-polluting industries?
Well, I think this is a transition that's going to happen. It may not be, it may not be in the next 2 months or the next year, but it's happening over the next 5 to 10 to 20 years. And I think it's a transition that Australia is particularly interested in. We've got a lot to lose, but we've also got a lot to gain. And we have incredible solar resource, incredible land resource that we can use to sequester carbon. I think the message for pollution-intensive industries is that it's much better to get on top of this problem early and to do it in a gradual way. And a broad-based carbon price across the economy is actually one of the cheaper ways of doing this. And that's, in fact, one of the things our report shows, that the most expensive ways you can deal with the problem are to have government pick particular sectors and particular technologies that they think are going to win, and then to support them. A much cheaper way of doing it is to apply a broad-based carbon price through trading or through taxes across the whole economy.
Cameron Hepburn, always good to have you back on the programme. Thank you very much for joining Lateline Business.
My pleasure.